Performative men. You've met one. You are one. You know the meme. You've seen it on the internet. This video is an analysis of the performative man. So to clarify, right, this video has two main parts. The first half of this video is the surface level breakdown, but the second half of this video is my actual argument. It's a bit like the iceberg. So the first part of this video, I'm going to walk you through the performative man meme, right? So what or who it is, what kind of behaviors get labeled as performative and why. I'm also going to give you my surface level criticism of the meme. So that's the first half of this video, right? The second half is my actual thesis, my actual thesis argument, and the actual interesting part of this video. And my argument here is that I think there's no actual way to not be performative. So you can accuse a man of being performative, but my argument that I'm going to try and convince you of, my hot take, is that they actually can't not be performative. It's not possible. So that might sound really confusing, like with no context, or like what the fuck does that mean? Don't fucking worry. I'll explain using some philosophers, none of which I actually have a good fucking understanding of, but fuck it, it's my channel. We're gonna talk about Lacan, Zizek, Althusser, that's right, fucking Lacanian analysis of the performative man. This video is as stupid as it sounds, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and in doing all of that, I'm gonna try and convince you again of my hot take, which is that I don't think it's possible for the performative man to not be performative. Like, I don't think you can just not perform, which I guess is kind of like, I guess this video is kind of like a defense of the performative man, except I don't think I want to defend them, but it kind of panned out that I don't fucking know. Okay, so starting with the first part of the video, right? So before we discuss anything, we need to establish our subject, the performative man. So you know the archetype, you know the meme, right? Probably, but in case you don't know because you actually live under a fucking rock or you have an actual life and you're not chronically online, a performative man is a meme about like a certain type of man, usually Gen Z, who's like affecting or like openly trying to appear very progressive, very feminist, very emotionally aware, very sensitive, but they're doing so in order to attract women, right? So that's the meme. So some of the common behaviors of the performative man include drinking matcha lattes, reading books written by women. So one common example is reading All About Love by Bell Hooks, or reading Sally Rooney books, and listening to indie female musicians, specifically Clairo or Lafe, I don't know how to fucking say Lafe. Listening to indie female musicians, basically. This is a man who is sensitive, but like in a curated way, like curated sensitivity. Masculine, but ironically, he probably rolls his own cigarettes and collects Labubus. This last one, I don't understand. Probably because it personally doesn't fucking do it for me. I think that one is weird. Carrying tote bags, wearing cardigans, like what girls would imagine like a kind, sensitive young man would do. A soft-hearted, sensitive poet to the world, right? Essentially. But the meme is that like when a guy is doing this, they have like the ulterior motive. It's done performatively, you know? Like basically it's like the picture of like the wolf like hiding under the sheep mask. That's basically it. So the idea is basically that like guys are doing this, or like carry tote bags and read feminist literature, like drink matcha, are doing so not because they genuinely like and believe these things, but more because it's a way for them to like cultivate an attractive persona that is both socially superior and attractive to the women that they're trying to attract, right? It's basically like a joking accusation of how sincere men are when they present themselves in this way or they dress in this way, right? Okay, so now that we've established the foundation, okay? So we know what the performative man is. This is my first hot take, which is not that hot. This is my surface level criticism, my surface level take of this meme, right? Which is that the performative man meme kind of relies on the assumption that people are thinking all the time. Which sounds fucking stupid, but like what I'm trying to say is that the meme kind of relies on the assumption that there is intent behind every aesthetic decision that people are making. But like, in my opinion, right, that's just not how people work, right? Because most people are doing things on autopilot. You wear what your friends wear. You listen to what TikTok tells you is trending or what is good. You drink what you see other people posting about on Instagram stories, right? It's not that deep, and it's also just like the path of least resistance, right? Or like whatever is in the cultural zeitgeist right now. And also, this might be a hot take to some of you, but like all of these things are just fucking mainstream, right? Like how just think, it's just like, how is liking Claro performative, right? Claro is performative. Claro has millions of fucking Spotify listeners. A dude that likes Claro is just like a fucking regular dude that likes popular things, right? Like, this is a stupid thing to say, in my opinion. Everyone is online, everyone is exposed to exactly the same 3 brands, right? You're all watching the same TikToks, the same Instagram reels, you're all absorbing the same kind of trend and aesthetic. Liking Claro is not a statement. It's algorithmically inevitable that you will like Claro. Or like, you're also just not thinking about it that deeply, right? Because it's a thing that you see other people get into, and so you get into it too, right? Path of least resistance. Like, you're probably not buying a tote bag to signal literary depth. You probably bought it because you needed a bag and it was like $5 at the charity shop, and you've seen other people have tote bags, so you get a tote bag as well. Like, done. What else do you need? Oh, you have tattoo sleeves, the really small little mini sticker ones where nothing really goes together. That's performative. Like no shit. They're tattoos. What tattoos aren't performative anyway? Unless they're like literally on a spot on your body where literally no one will ever see them, and you also don't think you'll ever have a lover in the future who will also see them, and it's also like not a sexy tattoo. But like, besides that very tiny niche example and location of a tattoo, like, was there ever a time when tattoos were not for other people to see or yourself to see, or like when people didn't get dumb as corny ass tattoos? Fucking no. Okay, that is kind of the idea of tattoos. It's to show something about yourself that you enjoy, right? In the 2010s, this was about being really fucking foaming at the mouth crazy about Harry Potter houses, and now it's about the little fine line, little shaky ass stick and poke, purposely kind of ugly, wonky ass tattoos, and that's also fine. The fact of the matter is that these aesthetic choices are just boring and they're mainstream, and boring also doesn't mean fake. It doesn't mean that people are doing them insincerely. It's just that the internet developed a bizarre allergy to anything that feels common. Okay, so that's my first point, right? But counterpoint to this is, when we think about these things, right, these performative markers, it's not just any mainstream common thing that gets labeled as performative, right? If you think about it, it's a very specific type of comment. Like, look at the defining features of what is supposedly considered performative, or like the meme, or like what things are like a performative, what does a performative man do, right? If you look at all of these things, in my opinion, what I notice is that these things are common, but they're pretending to be niche, right? So they're actually very popular, but they give the air of being niche or like curated or indie, right? They're associated with a mood of being curated and emotionally literate. Because going back to our initial point, right, which is that the meme about the performative man is that the performative man pretends to like these things because they're trying to attract girls, right? So they're all behaviors or markers or like aesthetic choices which are slightly feminized or more sensitive and considered more nuanced. So things like tote bags or matcha latte or like liking Claro or liking Lofty. These are all popular things, right? Like tiny tattoos. They're all popular things, but they wear the aesthetic of being niche and of being countercultural. It's a type of curated style which likes to disguise and announce itself as something underground or indie, but is ultimately still mass manufactured through a Spotify algorithm or your Pinterest board. It's basically like mainstream, but in lowercase, like in lowercase m mainstream. So my second surface level criticism of the meme is that because this is the way it is, the meme accuses men when they participate in such things or when they engage in such behavior, if they dress in a certain way, people accuse them and they assume that they must be strategically adopting it for an ulterior motive, right? And it's not because they like it, but it's because they're trying to signal something. So the issue, which is like probably pretty obvious to everyone, is that obviously that means that like every behavior is now subject to internet forensics, right? Like any surface level behavior, it turns into like semiotics, and there's like a low level paranoia about meaning for everything, right? Because what if you're a man and you actually like to read these novels, but now you can't because you're worried about being accused of being performative, even if it's a behavior or thing that you might have done anyway. Okay, so that is my surface level criticism of the meme, right? That's done. You've probably heard it before. It's really not that deep or profound or interesting. A million other videos have probably talked about that. That's lame. Crystal, what else do you have to bring to this idea, right? So now I'm going to talk about my actual thesis for this video, which is that I don't think there is a way to not be performative. Like a man who is accused of being performative, I feel like there is actually no way out here. There is no way to stop being performative or to stop performing. The only option as a person is to be performative. I'm going to explain what I mean by this. And in doing so, we're first going to talk about Lacan. So Lacan is a famous French philosopher and psychoanalyst. And the idea I want to talk to you about is Lacan's idea of the mirror stage. So what is the mirror stage? This is basically the idea that you as a person figure out who you are by seeing how other people see you. So the second that you're aware of being watched by someone, you're already performing in some way. So that sounds really confusing with no actual example. So we'll talk about it more in depth, right? An easy way to think about it is like when a baby is just born, right? The baby doesn't really recognize itself as like itself, right? Like when you were just born, when you were a baby, you don't have like the consciousness to be like, oh, I am me, right? You don't have the identity of like, oh, this is me. The baby doesn't think, oh, I am myself. It's only when the baby is like a bit older and it sees itself for the first time in a mirror and it recognizes that the image that they see in the mirror is themselves, that the baby is then like, oh, that's me. That's like the first snap of like recognition of like you see yourself or like a picture of yourself moving and you're like, oh, that's me. That's the first time that you have identity, you know? It's the first time you're conscious of like, oh, I am like me. So Lacan's idea is that you form your identity by first seeing a reflection of yourself and seeing the image and mistaking that image for you, right? So in the mirror example, that reflection is literal, right? You literally see a reflection of yourself. But Lacan says that there can also be a symbolic reflection. So an example of that would be if you identify yourself, or like if you identify you when you imagine how you're being seen by other people. So I'll give you an example to kind of explain that in further depth, right? So let's say you're in high school, right? And you dress a certain way. Let's say you wore overalls to school one day, right? So when you got up in the morning and you decided to put overalls on, you don't really know who you are, right? When you decided to put the overalls on, you're just trying on new styles, or just trying on new things. So you go to school in your overalls, and then someone sees you at school in overalls, and they say to you, oh, you're like one of those artsy kids, right? Because you're wearing the overalls. And so suddenly, after hearing them say that to you, you look at yourself through their eyes and you go, wait, yeah, I guess I kind of am. I am kind of artsy, I guess. I never thought of that before, but yeah, you're right, I am artsy. So after that interaction, after noticing that, or identifying with yourself and how that person sees you, you start to notice things that you do that match that identity, right? So you start leaning into them more, and then you also start to see it, right? You also see that in the past, maybe there's things you've done which seem artsy. So for example, maybe you've always doodled in your notebook in the past, but now that you kind of identify as an artsy person, or you think you're artsy, you also start bringing a sketchbook to class. And maybe you leave that sketchbook open just in case someone else sees it, you know? Maybe now you start thrifting oversized coats, or maybe you start dressing in a way that's also feels artsy, right? Because it feels right, even if you didn't consciously choose to do so before. Maybe you get really into journaling because that seems artsy, or like you talk about how you need to journal more. Maybe you start watching Crystal's old journaling videos. That's right. This is a YouTube plug. Okay, watch link up there. But basically, you start doing things that you think would also align with being artsy after you now have the realization, or you're like, oh wait, maybe you do identify as being an artsy person. And that happened not because you decided that that's your identity from within you, but because someone else saw and perceived you as artsy. And so now that person's perception is now reflected something back in you, right? And you're now chasing that image and you're trying to embody what it means to be that kind of person. So that would be what Lacan would say is a symbolic mirror. And it's a mirror because the image of yourself that you latch onto, of this being like an artsy person, that wasn't an internal choice, but rather it was given to you by the social world, by the outside world. And then you mistook it, you took that image and you mistook it for you and for your identity. So why bring this up in this video, right? So in Lacan's view, when you think about yourself, your self is already performative, right? You're already performative. Since you're a baby and you see yourself in the mirror for the first time and you mistake that image for being yourself, you're always chasing an image of yourself you think you're supposed to be. So what that means is that it's not that you have an identity first and then anything you do on top of that identity is then performative, right? Because it's not part of your identity. That's what makes it performative. what Lacan is saying instead is that the performance of whatever behavior it is that you're doing already is the identity. It's not identity plus performance, but rather identity equals performance. So it's baked in from the start. So from the literal beginning of consciousness, your identity is formed through misrecognition. You are always chasing an image of yourself that you are not. And the ego itself, your sense of like, this is who I am, this is my identity, that's already a performance. Lacan's idea is that there is no original pre-social, pre-performative self that got corrupted by matcha lattes and tote bags, because that person never existed. Okay, so following on from Lacan's idea, right, we're now going to talk about Althusser, who is another French philosopher, and he basically took Lacan's idea and refined it. So Althusser picks Lacan's idea up, and he says that not only does society reflect you, like the mirror that Lacan talks about, but society also actively hails you into a role. So you become a subject because someone calls you one. So this is what he calls interpolation theory. So this idea is basically that you don't get to choose who you are. So relating back to our topic at hand, right? You didn't ask to be the performative man, but once someone points at you and says it, you start acting with that label in mind, even if you didn't choose to be the performative man. So Althusser's actual example is, let's say you're walking down a street, right? And while you're walking down, you hear a voice from behind you, and it's a police officer who yells out, "Hey, you there." And you, after hearing the officer yell this, you turn around. So Althusser says that in the moment that you turn around, you've become a subject. You've been hailed. But the most interesting point here is that regardless of like after you hear someone like yell out and they're like, "Hey, you there," and you turn around, right? Althusser says that regardless of how you respond after like being hailed or like being called and you respond, regardless of from this point onward, whether you accept or reject the label, either way, you've been labeled and you've been hailed. So what does that mean? It means that once someone looks at you, right, and they call you performative, let's say that they see you like listening to I don't know, like let's say they catch you fucking listening to jazz and they're like, "Oh my god, you're so performative." Once someone looks at you and they call you performative, even if you don't think that you're being performative, or even if in that moment you're like, "No, I just like this music," you know, even if you reject their accusation that you're being performative, Althusser basically says it doesn't matter. You're still in the loop. So why is that, right? Why is that? You can think of it this way, right? If someone online calls your ass performative, right, for getting Sally Rooney, and you nod along and you laugh and you're like, "Ha ha ha, yeah, that's me. Catch me at the fucking bouldering gym next weekend," right? If you like lean into the joke, then obviously it's really obvious, we can both agree, that's someone that's obviously accepted the role, even like jokingly, of being performative, right? Of like being a performative man. They're like, "Yeah, I am performative." You know, like that is really obvious, someone that's accepted being performative. But flip it around, right? Let's say someone online calls your ass performative, but instead of laughing along with it, you scoff and you say, "No, I'm not like that. I just like Sally Rooney. She writes good books," right? So here on a surface level, it might seem that you rejected the label of being a performative man, right? But Althusser would argue that it doesn't matter. You've still accepted the terms of the label. You've still accepted the term of being performative, and that's because you would recognize that the label is addressed to you. So he's saying that if you're responding, regardless of how you respond, you've still been labeled. You're still in the loop. So think of it from the actual example that Althusser uses of the cop, right? So if a police officer yells, "Hey, you," and you turn around, right? Because the voice is behind you. You turn around when that person's like, "Hey, you there." Even if you turn around just to tell that person that you must be talking to someone else, right? That turn, the moment that you turn around, you're already the subject. And that's because the act of recognition produced you as the subject. So to quote Althusser, right? The hailed individual will turn around and he becomes a subject. Why? Because he had recognized that the hail was really addressed to him and that it was really him who was hailed and not someone else. So we apply this to the actual topic of the video, which is like performativity, right? If someone posts online, like men who drink matcha and listen to Claro are performative, and you, in reading that, you like stop drinking matcha to avoid being lumped into this group, or if you double down on Claro and you're like, "Oh, I do like Claro, it's not a bit," or even if it's really like fucking meta now, if you start making ironic content in response to that tweet that you see about performative men in order to like mock the label, regardless of any of those behaviors, you are still acting in reference to the label, and therefore you've already been pulled into the discourse. And so Althusser would argue you've not escaped it. You're now performing your response to being seen in such a way. Cool. So now we established that through Lacan and Althusser, there probably is no way to not be performative, and labeling something as performative makes you performative regardless of if you identify with the label or not. Now we're gonna tie this shit up with some fucking Slavoj Zizek, okay? Zizek, that you are more likely to know this guy, right? It's this guy. And for this next part of this video, we need to establish some basic assumptions that we can kind of agree on, right? So because we're talking about performativity in this video, right? If someone is performative, then that assumes that there is an opposite to being performative, which is to be authentic, right? So if you are not living performatively, then the opposite of that would be to say that you are living authentically, right? So let's agree for this video, the opposite of performativity is authenticity. So now we're going to talk about Zizek, right? And the idea that I want to pull from Zizek is that he says, or he believes that there actually is no way to be authentic. Like, there is no real you that hides underneath all of your layers. Zizek thinks that that doesn't exist, right? Like, remove the beanie and the Carhartt jacket and the slouchy vintage Levi jeans and the cardigan under your Carhartt jacket, Jesus. And then the organic 100% cotton t-shirt, right? Like, under all of that, Zizek argues there is no authentic, real you under that because the performance is you. Zizek was also very much influenced, inspired by Lacan's ideas, right? But Zizek goes one step further and he says that even when you as a person try to be sincere and you try to break the performance and be real, right? He says that that sincerity becomes a performance as well. There's no final escape into authenticity. And even your effort to be real is still shaped by ideology. You're still doing a bit. You're not choosing between real and fake, but rather you're just picking which performance to lean into. So Zizek argues that even rebelling against the label is baked into the structure, right? So in our example, because we're talking about the performative man, let's say you reject the label of being performative, right? You see the memes and you're like, no, I'm not, that's not me, I'm not performative. So if you fully reject it, let's say you go back to only eating microwave burritos and drinking Monster Energy, and you only wear like awkward fitting, skinny, but not skinny, weird jeans and like your high school hoodie, right? So you fully reject the label, you're like, I'm not gonna do the aesthetic choice anymore. From Zizek's point of view, this is still performative. This is still a type of performative behavior, but you're just being performative in a different sense and probably with like less followers on Instagram. But the core is the same. You're just being performative in a different perspective because you're still responding to the label. Okay, so that wraps up the main meat of my thesis, right? Like the idea that I wanted to present to you, right? So after hearing all of that, you might then be like, okay, sure. That's an interesting idea, Crystal. So I do understand the sentiment here and where your argument comes from, and you linked it together. But also, couldn't you argue that before you became conscious of the aesthetic, right? Or like before you became conscious of being performative, or if you used to listen to I don't know how to pronounce her name, Laffy, and no one ever used the word performative around you before, and I don't have Instagram, so I never saw the reels, I don't know the meme. Let's say I just don't know about the meme and I've just been doing all of these things. Wouldn't you argue that at that stage, that is the closest I've been to authentic, where I was doing behaviors because I wanted to, before anyone's hailed me, before anyone's labeled me as performative? Couldn't you argue that that was the point when I was being authentic? So that is an interesting point, person. That's no one's ever commented this, but like person of straw man's argument, that is an interesting counterpoint, right? So to address that, from a surface level intuitive standpoint, right, that feels true. Like that feels like it could be true, because we often associate authenticity with like a time before social self-awareness, right? So before irony, before labels, like it feels like the most pure way of being yourself. You know how like everyone says that children are the most pure, and a lot of that I think is because they don't have this type of meta self-awareness of like how others perceive them, right? But going back to Lacan and Althusser, they would actually push back on this, and they would argue that no, this argument doesn't work. And the reason is, Lacan would first say that there is no you prior to being seen, because the very act of becoming conscious of yourself for the first time when you're like a baby through symbolic reflection, like it happens when you're still a baby, that early version of you that was like not self-conscious of how others perceive you, right? That version of you was already identifying with an image of themselves that is constructed in relation to others. Because even babies, when they see themselves in the mirror, they become themselves by recognizing an image of themselves, right? Even if it's just in a mirror. But because it's an image, it already is and will always be fiction. And because it's fiction, it will always be in some way already something idealized and shaped by external input. So Lacan's argument here would be that the pre-aesthetic version of you isn't more real, it's not more authentic, it's just earlier in the loop. But the loop is already going on. It might be a less complicated loop, but it already exists, and it's not untouched by the gaze. And then Althusser would follow on from this, and they would point out that even before you were explicitly hailed or like explicitly labeled as a performative man, you were already being shaped by other ideology. So the most common way would be that society still calls you into roles before this specific label, right? So if you're a man, if you're a student, it could happen at school, like if someone calls you cool or cringe or authentic or fake. So you might not have been conscious of the exact like fucking vinyl matcha tote bag aesthetic when you were like 15, but Althusser argues that you were already responding to other social cues, like what was considered normal, what was considered cool, what was considered attractive, what was considered aspirational. You were never able to truly make choices in a vacuum, and your subjectivity was already being called into being. So essentially what they would say is that being pre-aware or like pre-awareness is not the same as pre-performance. And then Zizek's argument here would be that the desire to return to an authentic self is not possible. It is in itself a fantasy. You can't go back because there's nothing there. There is no Eden. There is no pure core self that's waiting underneath. The version of you before you knew what, you know, all these behavioral markers represented or meant isn't more authentic. It just hadn't been seen yet by others. And now that it has been seen, your behavior will shift. And it's not because you're fake, but it's because that's what it means to be a subject in a symbolic world. There is no outside to the gaze. There's only how you move inside it. So why does this fucking matter, right? Why did you make this video, Crystal? So, couple of reasons. Number one, I don't know what to make on this channel right now, because I'm burnt out and I'm going through some that is the main reason, honestly. But also number two, which is, I probably should have started with this, which is that everyone gets called performative now, right? The internet has turned common, sincere behavior into semiotics. Wearing a tote bag, having wired headphones. Even if you just like those things, or if you just happen to own those things, people will just kind of assume that you're doing it for the bit, right? But that is based on the fake assumption that there's like a real, pure, untainted version of yourself underneath all of that, right? But there just isn't. Everyone is performative in some way. And even irony, which is the thing that is used to supposedly mark yourself away from the bit, right? It's to like, irony is used a lot to show that you're smarter and more self-aware, right? That is part of the bit too. Irony doesn't get you out of the cycle. Like, imagine me making this video. Half the videos on my channel are literally titled, oh, what your blank says about you, right? That's the whole premise. Like, I put people in fake categories for fun to pay my rent. And I might just say I'm kidding about it, right? Like, the video is not to be taken seriously. It's just something for fun. But also, that is an argument that anyone can make if they're being ironic, right? Like, isn't everyone else also poking fun or doing the performative man meme, also kidding about it? Right? Like, what is it that I do that's different from what they do? Because self-awareness doesn't necessarily get you out of the trap. Because this is essentially a performative critique of performance, right? And that's what I do. Even if it's done in jest, right? Even if it's done in, like, it's like, for like shit and giggles, we're like, ha ha ha. That is the current default voice of the internet, which is irony, right? Irony is a currency, it's not a shield. Especially for me, because I critique performativity as a job. So I also profit off of it, right? And I can't lie, I'm probably not gonna stop, and I'm not gonna stop making those videos, and like, I might be self-aware about it in this video, but that also doesn't actually do anything. The self-awareness doesn't cancel anything out. And that's pretty bad, right? Like, that kind of sucks because it warps your ability to love things. And it makes it hard to express sincere love or interest in anything because you're always afraid that it'll be seen as a bit, or that you'll sound cringe, right? Because sincerity opens you up to true mockery, because you're showing like the exposed soft side of your belly. So the only way out of that is to be constantly self-aware and then constantly be in the state of doing things. I'm like doing this, but I'm doing it ironically, right? And that sucks, because you numb yourself, and the longer you do that, the harder it is to get back to real feeling. But I also hate the other extreme, which is, I think I started with on this channel, but I hate that perception as well. And that's basically like when I made a video about journaling that did really well, and then after that video, I felt the pressure where I felt like people wanted me to be like sniveling into my cardigan sleeve every day, like being really sad and like talking about journaling. But that is not me all of the time, right? That's only some aspect of me. I don't like being seen that way fully. And so I did the reverse, and I leaned into the drier aspect of my personality and my humor. But now people have the reverse perception of me, and people think that I'm like this all the time. And I find myself feeling like I'm always thinking of a shtick or like content for YouTube. And like, is that me? Is that what I've become from making these videos online? Can I ever sincerely enjoy or love something? Because I find it hard to express at this point a true and earnest interest for anything and how it makes me feel. And the only way I can do so is through a detached, semi-ironic way. But I'm not sure I enjoy that. But again, I said I don't like the other extreme either, because usually what I notice is that there are a couple of types of people who are like very sincere, and they're like very, they're like true about their craft, and they're like, oh, I want to do everything like sincerely, I want to do it truly, right? I don't like that either, because in my experience, there's a couple types of people like this. The first is that those who are like genuinely sincere and talented, but they are also unwilling to make concessions on their craft, right? Or like to sacrifice any vision, any integrity, which is fine and admirable on the face of it. But then they also bemoan how hard it is to pursue such discipline or craft. But like, yeah, that is the trade-off you get if you want to be true to whatever pursuit or calling that you have, right? Like, yeah, it's gonna be hard, and take it or leave it. That's the trade-off that you make, but you can't have it all. And then the other type of truly earnest, sincere person that I don't like the association with is that people who say they're sincere and earnest and passionate and true, but they take no action, and they're unable to produce anything productive with whatever feeling or emotion or passion they have besides just telling people what they'd like to do with these things. And I hate that. I don't like that. I don't want to be associated with that. So what is the conclusion to this video, to sum up? Because I feel like there should be some resolution where I tell you that it's okay. It's okay if you're performative, because there's no such thing as being performative or authentic, because it's all the same and it's all different sides of the same coin, and the most important thing is to acknowledge both. But like, I'm not sure. I don't know, because what does that do? I don't think that's true. I don't think it's accurate. I think I have to leave it unresolved. Because if I give an ending, that's still a stance, and it's a performative resolution. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, I don't know any video on this channel that's similar in style to this video. You should check out this one. I think this one is the most similar to this, but if you want to see me be performatively cynical about other people, then you can check out this playlist there, and then watch all that, and then come back to this video, and then just get into like a really deep spiral in your head about like everything's too fucking meta. Subscribe.